Alright, at some point I'm going to have to find a new way to hold my phone because my fingers are starting to cramp up and it's not agreeing with me very well. Um, but anyway, I'm thinking today about how, the arts are a critical part of life because, they're basically a representation of what's going on at the time, some kind of level. There's a representation of something deeper that's going on. And I think there's some things we can actually see at the time it comes out as why it's a thing, but then there are other things that I feel like we miss until way later as other things have started to shift. So, for an example, last night I decided to watch Friday the 13th, right? So I've been on this kick since I had basically since I was chicken shit all my early years, because I thought like horror movies were bad and all this stuff. So I just refused to watch them because they were evil, right? So now I'm kind of making up for lost time. It's like, okay, so I definitely don't believe what I was conditioned into believing previously. So now where I am at, what can I, you know, take from the what I receive of it, what I'm watching, what I'm reading, listening to, all these things. It's like, what is the message for me now that I am not existing solely from the space of my conditioning? And so last night, before I even bothered watching and posting my other video, I went home and I mentioned I was really tired yesterday. So I went home and laid down for a while and watched a movie. And then I took a little intermission to watch the video and get the information I needed to put in the description or the name. And um, sorry, I got a text message. It confused me for a second. Anyway, then I decided to watch the second one. So, first one, I think I saw it came out in 1980. So, the big thing that I noticed when I was watching it is, of course, it's got a girl walking around all excited because she's going to be a camp counselor at the summer camp. And, of course, the townspeople are all talking about don't go there and blah, blah, blah. A guy is voluntold to take her, or to drive her up to the camp because she's walking, right? So it's like, yeah, what? I forget what they said in the movie. Like, it's so far away that it wouldn't make sense to walk it. So somebody, they voluntold this guy to take her. When she goes to get in the truck, okay, he's not big on the idea of taking her first. But when she goes to get in the truck, like, he's all up, like, on her ass, pushing her into the truck, right? And it didn't sit right with me from the get-go. It's just like, ugh. Just like this whole thing. And, of course, I'm thinking that kind of makes sense for the time frame, but at the same time still really gross. And, just that awareness of how much things have changed and how that was just acceptable back then, and let's put it in a movie where you're just shoving them all up with, you got your hands all up in their business and everything and throwing them in the truck and blah, blah, blah. Bothered me, right? But I was like, it's a movie. We're just gonna not dive too deeply in that. We're just let it go as a movie. 444. And when I got to the next movie, I was okay. I know it's kind of common in horror movies to have like these very sexualized things. But still, it's just when the girl is walking, she goes on a walk after dark, and she's got this like crop top that's like right up under her boobs, and she's clearly not wearing a bra, and it's just like, okay, this is how we're going to camp, okay, whatever. And she decides to go skinny dipping because nobody's around, right? And it's night, full moon is full, blah blah blah, whatever. So she strips off, and well, I mean, naturally the boobs are on the screen, which, whatever, they're always there, right? But then it's like, okay, it wasn't a close-up shot by any means, but you could still see pubes and everything. It's just like, there's something here that is causing extreme dissonance in my system. What is this about? But I didn't have enough of the information at that time that I was working on processing. Now, I was able to let it go because it's a movie. I think I wanted to say the second one came out in 81, but still, it's a movie. Let it be a movie. But still, knowing there's something more to this that I'm having to work through. So, as I was getting ready for bed, what came to mind was when my grandfather was, he shattered his femur, had the surgery, was at the hospital, moved to the rehab hospital, then went to the rehab at the nursing home facility. There was a very brief, 2-day span where he was back at home. And, they had a hospital bed in the living room, had everything rearranged in there, and all this stuff, right? So my aunt calls me over one day because my mom's at an appointment, and she needed some help moving my grandfather because apparently he'd peed all over himself, and you can't let him just lay in it, right? So she called for me to help. And this man was like, okay, big thing. I understand not wanting to feel exposed around your daughter and granddaughter, right? I don't want to see it either. I didn't. No part of anything that was going on was I interested in. I was there to help my aunt with moving him. And, she's a former nurse, so she's got to do what she's got to do, whatever. But the way he was acting, the way he was insulting us, like he had something special that we would want to see, being an 85-year-old man. And my aunt's trying to be all nursery and compassionate, and she's like, now we've both been married and blah blah blah. And I just stopped and was like, dude, nobody wants to see your shit. End story. Knock it off. It's like, it's not so special that there's anything we should be excited about. And especially since you're fucking family, and especially because you're fucking 85. But the way he was acting and the way he was treating us when we were trying to help him. And first off, I did not see anything because I intentionally went out of my way anytime that was a thing to not look. Because I don't want to see that shit. But he was hateful and insulting until I said, nobody wants to see your shit. And then I think he was just so astounded that I would speak to him that way. But then, that really sit with me last night. I was livid when the whole thing came up at the moment that it came up, but when it came up again last night and I was just replaying those feelings, it's like, this is fucked up. 10. But then, what I was realizing was, from the cultural reference point of the time, the movies demonstrating that this was something that was just casual and okay and all these things, that it was just, men are supposed to be able to look at women whenever they want to, right? My grandfather had a box of fucking Playboys under the bed for years that nobody was supposed to talk about, and he acted like he was embarrassed that anybody would know that they were there, but somehow they were supposed to be there because it meant he was more of a man, because he had this box of half-naked women under his bed, or mostly naked women under his bed. But then his delicacy over the possibility of being exposed. So I had this time last night where I was fucking livid as I was piecing this shit together, right? Because that is exactly what the system has created. This patriarchal bullshit where women are objects and property, and men are supposed to be out there conquering all the women and having sex with as many as women as possible, right? Spreading their seed and all this shit. But then women are seen as whores and all this stuff. So yeah, tone the anger down so I can think my way through this again. But that's exactly the purpose of the system, right? So the system wants to rule over people. Religion has pushed it so we're supposed to believe that men are over women and women are subservient and less than and property and essentially valueless, except for the value that the men that own them have given them value. But in truth, I've talked a lot on here about the sacred womb space, right? The womb is absolutely sacred and it is life-giving, right? So the patriarchal systems want to devalue women so they, in their toxicity, gain access to the creation space. So what is created is a whole lot of bullshit. And men in the not toxic state are supposed to be protectors, right? So the system that makes it okay to and expected to look at as many naked women or whatever as possible, because essentially that looking is enough to latch on in the toxic state of the distorted masculine, that looking is enough to latch on to the creation space so that what is created is more toxicity. Okay. And going back to, I talked about the idea of, we hear a lot about men give love to get sex and women give sex to get love, right? This idea, which is a bastardization of the sacred thing that it's supposed to be. Because in a divine connection where you've worked through your toxicity and, healed from that and, come to a much more balanced state of what you're supposed to exist in, the divine connection is extremely protective of one another, right? Of the counterparts of both people, and the loving connection are safe and valued, and that's the divine space. Okay, so like there's this thing like within the twin flame community gets talked about a lot with, there's the divine masculine, there's the divine feminine. Keeping in mind this, to get into that state of divinity, you have to do the healing work. Our existence in the physical form as humans is the distortion, right? So, I've talked a lot about how hell isn't somewhere you go when you die. It is here. It is this physical space where we have to completely forget who we are and what we came here to do and learn it all over again before we can get to the point of actually doing the thing we're supposed to be doing on this earth. And most people don't do that because the system doesn't want them to, right? So the system makes it so the toxic, in the toxicity, the toxic masculines latch on to the toxic, distorted feminines' life-giving womb space energy, so they can't move beyond the distortion. So women end up getting locked into this space because the womb is the space of creation, and all these distorted masculines that should never have had access to the womb space latch on. And when the masculine aspect is in its divine state, it is extremely protective and love, right? That feeling of love, the able to be truly loving, and what that is supposed to entail. Locking back to women give love or give sex to get love, and men give love to get sex. In the distortion, it's just a cheap view or a cheap acceptance that there's nothing really valuable and worthwhile. But if we actually do the work and become the essence of the divine in this physical space, the counterparts coming together create a third energy. That love energy is the God energy, right? So if you want to see God, it's through healing the distortion and coming into wholeness as an individual, and then the counterpart connection, right? And everything happens within first. And this is not speaking to physical ways that it plays out. This doesn't mean that, the divine masculine has to be a male or the divine feminine has to be a female. That is not what this is saying at all, which is exactly what the church cheapened it to, what religion and the patriarchy has cheapened it to keep people locked in the distortion. So, all the women throughout history who have been seen as objects and property and less than, it's because the distorted masculine in his toxicity is latching on to the distorted feminine's life force energy and life giving creation energy space to stay in the toxicity, which is why the system in the world that we have today is so fucked up, right? Especially, just look at fucking America right now, because you don't need to go any further than that to see how fucked up everything is. So, yeah. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and move to this other point because it's the one that's sitting in my mind right now. This, something that infuriates me currently is hearing, especially Republicans, mouth off about family, faith, and freedom. It's like, because you say the words, that's supposed to mean that you value what those words represent. But in actuality, the more you say those words, the more it shows that you buy into the bullshit that they represent. Because if you're talking about freedom in this current state of existence, yet you're buying into the system that is keeping people enslaved, you know, the idea that, oh, I think I heard, dipshit Hitler in office said something about how people want to work 80 plus hours a week to have health care and to actually make any kind of living and be able to do anything. It's like, no. Okay, freedom, right? So the more they talk about freedom, the less freedom they actually give you, the less freedom you have, because they're taking it away. Because the ones at the top that are in the distortion, that are especially high in the distortion, want to keep people locked in the distortion. So, okay, another thing that plays into this toxicity point, especially of the there's an ant dragging a dead ant around on my windshield. Okay. Anyway. The more you speak to the words and say the words to prove you're aligned with the words, you're actually aligned with the opposite of what those words are. Like, family, how much they talk about family, and then look at the fucking family in office. How many wives has he had? How many people has he raped or assaulted outside of his, marriages? Or, I just read something talking about him bragging that he would go into bathrooms and dressing areas for beauty pageants of like teenage girls because he owned the pageant. It's like, there again, another thing that keeps people locked in toxicity. Pageants, right? I understand that there are some good things that can come from those, but at the same time, I feel like the biggest part of what it's there for is to enhance the distorted viewpoint, right? So currently not a fan of anything that does that, especially seeing how everything's playing out in the world. So yeah, so this asshat dictator wannabe saying all the right words about family and clearly is no good representation of a healthy family. Just because you put your family in office with you at various degrees, nepotism, is that what that is? And that's not necessarily a bad thing if the purpose of having it in existence is to help your family be able to, have jobs and do things worthwhile. But when it's a toxic system that clearly is all about the dickhead in charge, as with my family, I've talked a lot about my grandfather on this channel, keeping the illusion of happy family, healthy family at the forefront while masking all the toxicity that's really going on. Because I'm confident, just looking at how they act, especially how his sons talk, there ain't no way that was a healthy, loving family. It's an illusion. And, they got the money so they don't have to be happy. But they also don't have to give a shit about anybody else, right? So they got their illusion at the forefront so they can say all they want about family values and all this bullshit, because that's the right word you say to keep the church happy, because family is the most important thing, but yet the most abusive family connections are generally within religious communities. Go back to that freedom point. Okay, so you hear the line about freedom isn't free. Because you're supposed to think that it makes the soldiers who fought in previous wars, as these valiant heroes that, because they died, we were able to live in this free country, except for it's not really a free country. And even those that are, I enlisted. I voluntarily signed my life over to the government because I thought that was a noble thing to do, right? That was, there's a lot of military types in my family. My dad was in the Guard for 21 years and retired out. My brother was in the Air Force. My dad's dad, it was his biggest disappointment in life that he was unable to go in the military. My mom's dad was in the Army for a couple years. I don't know how long he was actually in. It was always presented as it wasn't an extensively long time. So when they're making a big deal about his military service at his funeral, it honestly threw me off because, he talked about it periodically, but it didn't sound like he was any kind of special superhero in what he was doing or why he was there or anything, or in how long he served or anything. It wasn't an extensive period of time that he served. But it's neither here nor there. Bunch of cousins, bunch of bunch of cousins anyway. I don't feel like my dad's brothers did have any military time, but I could be wrong. But anyway, still, there's been a lot of people. And it's always been seen as one of those really noble, valiant things. And I talked about when I was in the relationship with the guy that I thought I was going to marry. at one point, it was moving into when we actually broke up. I told him that I felt like I was supposed to go in the military. And he said something along the lines of, that's fine and I would support you, but I wouldn't move with you. And it was like one of the biggest thing that stood out to me in that moment was he obviously doesn't see this relationship as being something worthwhile, where if I did this thing, he would care about if it stayed together or not. So that was kind of one of those things that was early on in the breakdown, I think. It was one of the first things that really stood out of this to me as this, there's something here, it's not going to work. Ouch, ooh, my fingers locked up. Anyway, yeah, I've talked a lot about, and that's another point that I think I should mention. I don't know that there, even in the cousins that have been in the military, that there's other females that went in. Yet, it was an essential part of my path. And again, the biggest part of it, going to that, the importance when I went in of proving that you're biologically still what's on your birth certificate, right? So I've talked about that point on here a whole lot, right? And that was a focus. That was an important piece. But since I've talked about that in other videos, I'm going to just let that one go at this point in time because that's not the point. Point is, you enlist. Or perhaps you get drafted. Either way, you have to sign a contract to the government. Basically, committing your life, dedicating your life over to whatever bullshit cause the asshat in chief wants you to go fight for. But it's like this big noble thing that you're doing, right? You're signing your life over. You're putting your own life and existence on the line for the good of the country, you think. But then when you get there, you're literally just a number. They don't give a shit about your family in that existence. They don't care about whether you make it home or not. They want numbers. So if they need to go throw their weight around in the world somewhere else, they have the numbers to do that. So then there's a lot of these former service members that once they get out of military, okay, maybe they were injured badly enough that they can't have a regular life, right? Maybe they, shrapnel, losing limbs, whatever the fuck it may be. Or, one of my mom's cousins had a girlfriend when he went in, and his best friend hooked up with his girlfriend while he was gone. And then, he ended up becoming an alcoholic. Whether it was a direct link, it was definitely a part of what got him there. But government don't care about that shit. They just want you there as a number. So you have to fight for them. So you sign this contract. Now, remember the chords that I've talked about? All these contracts are basically means of strengthening the cords, especially toxic karmic cords. So, okay, whatever whatever happens as far as somebody's service while they're in or whatever else, there's lots of women that end up getting raped or assaulted in the military. Because, as I've talked about, that setting things up into locking it into this or that, where it's okay for this to assault that because that's not supposed to be here, right? It's just something they're not supposed to be here, so it makes it okay to hurt them, which is essentially what religion does in the world. And hijacking all the things. Okay. So, Berecker had a thing on his Instagram where he posted this clip where it's this woman talking to a group of kids about how worthless they are outside of church, and Jesus died for you, and ignore everything they say about the, eggs and bunnies not having anything to do with Jesus' death and all this stuff. Ignore that stuff. Focus on the fact that you're worthless, right? And of course, his was a commentary on how destructive and harmful that bullshit is, which is one of the key elements that most of us who have been harmed by our religious pasts, why we left, and what we're trying to recover from and heal after, all that stuff. But it's like, even that. Okay, so all along the way throughout history, you get the stories of, okay, now granted, the ones you're supposed to focus on for the religious aspect of things is how others speak negatively against the church because they're heathens and they're doomed to hell and they will never be saved and they're not worthwhile. Their lives are not of value because they don't have Jesus. So since they're not worthwhile, they go in and decide they want somebody's property and start, killing people off, or entire groups of people, for fuck's sake. Okay. Christmas did not become Christmas. There has always been some sort of pagan festival dealing with the change of seasons, or like the return of the light, I think is the key piece of it. But when the Christians set out to, save the heathens and kill those who weren't agreeable to it. Okay, so they kill off the ones that aren't agreeable and don't go willingly lay down and die in the corner. So they'll line it up so it's okay to kill them off because they're going to hell anyway. And then hijack this, is it Festival of Lights or some, I don't know, something to do with light coming back, and there's the lengthening of the days and all that stuff. So they hijack this thing, and then they tell you it's Jesus' birthday. So they done hijacked an existing tradition to put this thing over the top of it to coerce people into believing what they're saying is true. So, and then insert other bullshit along the way to support that it was Jesus' birthday or whatever. I still think it is incredibly ironic that, ironic, is that the right word? I don't know. Interesting that the time of year they chose to make about this Christ figure, lone God figure, if you actually pay attention to the histories, they think Jesus was more likely a Gemini or a Cancer, right? For birth time frame. But since they hijacked this tradition that already existed and took it over to insert this other thing on top of it, the time of year that they hijacked, okay, don't get me wrong, I love Capricorns. They are some of my favorite people. My brother's a Capricorn, and he's like been my number one ally throughout my life, right? And there's a vulture flying up overhead now. So one of the things that we kind of pick at each other about, okay, and also Cancer and Capricorn are sister signs in the zodiac, so they're across from each other and kind of opposites but complementary in some kind of way, whatever. They're sister signs. So it's kind of interesting to me that me and my brother have these sister signs, and I think that's a layer of why we've been as close as we have been throughout our lives, is because even our signs are in agreement with each other. But that said, we still kind of pick on each other for the signs and whatnot. One of my favorites for him is, okay, of course, the goat symbolism is funny in and of itself too, just because goats are really weird. Just think of like these really steep hills or like mountains that you see, and then there's like this little itty bitty footing, and yet there's goats all the way up at the top. It's like, how the fuck did they even do that, right? Like stubborn and hard-headed type stuff, and yeah, that's possible death, whatever, it's no big deal. But at the same time, Capricorn is represented by the devil card in tarot. So, just want to put that out there again. Interesting that their Christ figure they put at a time of hijacking this existing tradition to make it about his birth date, which aligns with this devil figure in tarot. Now, granted, I think that's another one of the reasons why they demonize all the witchy divination things, because if you start making these connections, then it's like, why? If this was the godly way of doing things, why would that fall under this Capricorn season that's represented by the devil, but yet we're saying it's Jesus' birthday? I think that's why, they've turned anything, any kind of divination into this evil thing that you're not supposed to have anything to do with, because they don't want you catching on to what you would catch on to, like that point, if they actually had access to those things. So they claim it as witches, and witches are bad and evil, even though that wasn't even brought in until like the 1400s, I'm wanting to say, and I forget the guy's name. That was the one that specifically said, or specifically turned on witches, 4444, and made them this evil thing, because What they were was the healers, right? And those that have access to higher spiritual information, or also women, because, going back to the divine feminine and divine masculine, the feminine rules over the upper three chakras, the masculine rules over the lower three chakras. So, that puts the divine masculine over root, sacral, and solar plexus, and the divine feminine over throat, third eye, and crown chakra. And, well, she comes down, so crown, third eye, throat, and he goes up, and they meet in the heart space. So there again, twin flame connection. I've talked about trying to learn to be heart-led on this whole path, and opening up to the possibility of this connection, where when I was first given the information as to who he was to me, only after I committed my love and career lives over to the universe, my initial reaction was, yeah, right, he's out of my league. Which is a big part of why the system wants women so far removed from the true essence of who we are. Because if we allow ourselves to believe that we are anybody's property, then we're relying on things outside of us to save us, to do the work for us, to do the healing. It's like you're expected on earth not to do the healing work because you said the prayer and got Jesus forgiveness, and then that's all you need. But that literally doesn't teach you anything, because every single person I know that has made a big deal about saying the prayer and doing the things to have Jesus in their life, there's always that disconnect, right? Because nobody actually does the work when they're relying on somebody else having done the work to get them to heaven, and they just believe it, so that's all they need, right? But going back to, why women have been silenced for that matter, as the divine feminine rules over the throat chakra, because we're supposed to have access to this higher level information, that if we get locked into the distortion from the system, we get locked into the distortion because of the system, right? So because of all these toxic patriarchal energies latching on to the sacred womb space and giving life to this awful, miserable existence, where people are treated like shit and killed for belief systems, just to fucking hijack the whole way of being anyway. Anyway, where was I saying? What was I going? Where was I going with that? Distortion. If we accept subservience, we are removed from our power. If we are removed from our power, we focus more on trying to find safety in the lower chakras, because the distorted masculine is not able to provide that, because the distorted masculine is off doing God knows what. I watched this natural mystic video several weeks ago, and one of the things that she talked about was sometime last year. She said something along that lines of, who knows what the masculine's doing, but she was talking about like the divine masculine and like where he is in the connection. And that was when I had the dream that got me started on the YouTube thing again after I had taken a break, where the girl told me I needed to start sharing the story I already had to share before more of my mission would be revealed. Then, I talked about crawling through this room, this crowded room of people on like this sort of comfort mat thing, like one of those ergonomic things that's supposed to help you if you're standing on concrete all day and help you not have miserable body aches forever because you have to be on your feet like that, right? So I'm crawling through, trying to not be noticed by this huge group of people. And he comes in, Twin Flame, from another direction. Same situation, crawling through on one of these comfort mats, and trying not to be seen by this big crowd of people. But as soon as we cross paths, we jump up. It's like, people don't matter anymore. And it's like, we take off. And it's like, we have this mission that he is more aware of what's going on than I am. And I've talked a lot on here about how I feel like that is, that whole, the piece where, I have to start trusting my heart and following that, right? So I started giving it a chance that this could possibly be a true thing, that there is this connection, and he is the person that I am connected to, and that it is actually something much deeper than what I could possibly imagine from any kind of love, friendship, whatever kind of connection, right? So I had to make space to believe in this thing, which was not easy, especially when everything in my life has basically proven me wrong on so many things. Like, when I would try to trust myself, and then I would speak of something, and then everybody would shut me down because I didn't know what I was talking about. But it's like, that point is, I've always been more in tune with the energies. It's one of those glorious Cancer things because, Cancers are feeling. It's a water sign. It kind of flows and moves through things and I've talked about how it's like I can feel somebody else's dissonance, right? So like with my brother, when I first started the YouTube thing, there was a long span of time where I wouldn't tell him anything I was doing because I knew he wasn't safe to talk to about the stuff. But what I was able to start doing was, like talking to him about boundary setting and, telling him what I was noticing with the family stuff as I was kind of stepping back and disconnecting. And then once he started doing it, and he started disconnecting and shielding his own energy, like that was a big thing. Rocks have been a big thing on this. Obsidian, hematite. I know he's got those two. I don't know what all he's got. I know Mookite Jasper is one of them because I made sure to get him some of that too. It's like I was able to pick up on some of the things that I thought would help him, but also would help stabilize him to make things safer for me on this journey as well. So yeah, I started talking to him about setting boundaries and, shielding his energy and giving him ways to do these things. And then eventually he became safe enough to talk to about it. But it's like before, when our family was so, when our whole paths and existences and belief systems were so fucked up with the toxic family system mentality, which is keep the illusion alive, even though we weren't aware that was the thing back then. We weren't safe for each other back then because the family was so in our system, right? So I talked about how we were made to feel that secrets meant we were doing something wrong. But all it really did was, if we were unable to have secrets from our family, they were able to literally shit on anything worthwhile we could have done or may have tried to do. Right? So, going back to my bear picture, because that's the most recent, really obvious one that just kind of slapped me upside the head. It was, I won this thing, and within 30 minutes, my parents had figured out a way to hijack the day and make it this upsetting thing for me. It's like, the only reason I submitted my pictures to the contest was because the only prize I knew of was that my picture might be the centerfold in the Zoo magazine for the spring-summer edition. And I thought maybe somebody else would get some enjoyment out of the pictures that I enjoyed. I took a bunch of pictures that year. That was October 2023, after the Twin Flame connection came up. And when I was in that space of feeling like he was with me while I was at the zoo with my mom, my aunt, and my niece. It's like, obviously at the physical level he wasn't there, but at this energetic level he was very much there the entire day with me. And like the just the stuff that was happening, conversations, little comments that would get put out there along the way, it's like nobody else was aware of him there, but I was, because upper chakras, right? So being more in tune with my upper chakras, I was able to experience this. But then, so the picture thing, or the contest comes up the next year. I submit pictures for it. Then I find out I win. Within a half an hour, my parents had sucked the life out of that moment for me. And I spent the rest of the day crying. It was because I had tried to do something and it got out of line with what was acceptable for the family and keeping the illusion alive. Because I wasn't supposed to have my own life. I was only supposed to ever feed into the toxic family system. Sorry, this answer really distracting. I don't know if this other one's like stuck to him or what, but he's like dragging him everywhere. He's not, I think it went up on the roof finally. But yeah, like that, them sucking the life out of things was why I was never able to do more with my life. But that's exactly the system that is in place. It's to suck the life out of everybody, right? So starting with, okay, they got to start with the kids, because kids, first being born into this space, they are closest to the divine already. That going back to that idea of must become like children. That's the idea behind that, because kids are more closely in tune with who they are when they come here, right? They're more connected to the divine because, the masculine and feminine aspects of themselves at that point aren't in the distortion. The distortion is something that comes in because of the conditioning in this earth space, right? So children are number one that they gotta suck the life out of, right? But that's also why the toxic patriarchal religions and whatnot will try to marry off young girls to creepy old men. And then you're supposed to just be barefoot and pregnant forever. That's how they suck the life out, right? So kids, because they're most in their divine state, because they have more of the balance between the two aspects of themselves and haven't gotten hijacked by the distortion just yet. Their energy is essential to this keeping the toxic system alive. So that's why there's like so much, okay, like ideally a church would be a safe space to go, right? And yet, if you really look into it, that seems to be where most of the pedophiles lurk. And many of them are called pastor or priest or whatever the fuck else, right? So people that have important roles in the church are the ones assaulting the young ones, right? The youngest, the most innocent and pure of all. Why? Because that feeds the distortion, right? So, you know, and I talked the other day about like the chords and the different ways that those are enhanced. And, you know, I mentioned the contracts and whatnot. So, you know, when you sign your life over to something, you're entering into an agreement with the system, basically. I mean, whether it's the bank because you wanted to buy a house or something, or fucking government because you wanted to do a good, noble thing, but then you lock yourself into this trap of they don't care about you. They can do whatever the fuck they want with you. You're just like a fucking sucker. You are a pawn to the system. And the evidence of that is how little care is given to those that come back wounded. Whether it's mentally, emotionally, physically, whatever. You know, the fact that the number is as high as it is, with I think it's 22 soldiers a day that commit suicide because of this toxic system, because you're signing your life over to literally not give a shit to what's actually like valiant and noble and the worthwhile causes that you think you're going into. It's the system can suck the life out of you, and they just choose, you know, whoever they want to try to take over today, they might go attack them and then claim that they're somehow in the right because of some bullshit in a religious text that makes them more important than anybody else. There again, religion, especially patriarchal religions, I mean, specifically patriarchal religions, but Christianity kind of trumps it on that one, is the Antichrist. The very thing that they are going around telling you you're missing out on if you don't have Jesus is the very thing they're fucking cock-blocking you from getting to. So it's, you know, we're supposed to just accept that all these cheap versions of love and, you know, the love of conditions, and this is as good as it can get, so you might as well just accept that and fall in line. You know, I was thinking, my mom listens to a lot of my grandma has the smut books, but my mom audiobooks them. So, of course, I get to walk into the room on occasion and hear all sorts of fucked up shit coming off these smutty books. It's just like, or audiobooks. And it's like, the point of that, going back to the idea of, you know, the arts demonstrating what is going on at a deeper level. You know, that's the thing that we're going to have to refer back to one day. I was thinking about that too. So on Instagram, it appears that there's this thing where you have to, you know, everybody's masking the words that they want to use because they will get demonetized if they use the words. So 100 years from now, there's going to be a lot of people really confused as to why or what a grapist is and why there are so damn many of them all at once. There's like, even that, it's literally just falling in line with the system, because this thing that is supposed to be appalling because it is appalling, we can't address it as appalling because we got to soften it. So because, we don't want people getting triggered, having these issues. But they're issues that we need to have a reaction to, and not a good reaction to, because it's bullshit that they exist, and that the system in place is not only allowing it, but in fact encouraging it to exist. I don't know if there's anything I want to add to this. We're already at 6 minutes. Do I save the more passion for tomorrow? Because I can go on forever. We've seen that. Usually it's not as put together on a thought. I am wearing this though. So yeah, my new favorite non-servium. The back says, "I will not serve." But it's like, even that idea, it's like I was thinking about, like, okay, the idea of the cross. And what it really is a representation that that person is willing to buy into the bullshit that the system is selling them, to ignore all the dissonance that arises because they're incapable of holding the balance that these two things exist, because the system, the first toxic system we're in, of course, families are like number one on where most of that comes in at, because that's our first line of defense against anything else in the world, right? But then church is huge, because so many of us went to church with our families. And, we're taught all these good family values, while also getting abused by the systems that come out of them, or the beliefs and ideas that come out of the system. Yeah. I've thought a lot about it. It's like, man, if Jesus was here today, he'd be rocking this thing upside down too, because he knows what's actually going on. Whereas everybody that wears it is so completely delusional, because they said the prayer, they did the thing, they committed their lives to this thing. Yet another kind of energetic contract. I buy into the bullshit that the church is selling me. So, yes, I belong to the system. Ugh. So yeah. Anyway, I feel like since it's slowed down, this is probably a natural part to bring it to an end, and say more tomorrow. As always, I appreciate you. Until the next time. See ya.